Welcome to the Unspeakable Podcast. I'm your host, Meghan Daum. This is a very special episode of the podcast, kind of a emergency meeting or last minute meeting. We're recording this on December 7th. And since a lot of my listeners have probably been following arguments this past week in the Supreme Court regarding a historic case involving medicalized treatment for gender dysphoric and gender questioning minors, I thought I would call three people who are extremely well versed on this issue and have all been in Washington, D.C. covering this story. I will introduce them briefly. They are Jamie Reed, Lisa Selin Davis, and Ben Appel. Ben is going to be hopping in a few minutes here, but I'll just let you know that I'll introduce him first since he's not here. And he's a man and his name comes first in the alphabet. Okay, so Ben is a writer living in New York. He's writing a book about being a gender heretic called Cis White Gay. He covers this subject a lot. He's been on the podcast before. He has a Substack. Lisa Selin Davis is a very prolific writer on gender issues. She runs the Substack Broadview. She's working on a book about the new gender movement. Does your book have a title yet, Lisa?
No.
Okay. We'll think of one. You should have a lottery. You should, for the highest level membership on your Substack, that gets to name the book.
Yeah.
Think about
if
that.
only I was allowed to name it myself.
Okay. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Okay. And Jamie Reed is one of the first public whistleblowers from a pediatric gender clinic in the U.S. that was at Washington University. She was on the podcast talking about that. She's now the executive director and co-founder of the LGB. I don't think it's T anymore, is it? Courage Coalition?
I don't know how soon this will go out, but it will be eventually rebranding potentially.
Okay, it's going to, all right, it's going out soon. So I think it is still the LGBT. Okay, yeah. Courage Coalition. Okay. Which is an American-based nonprofit of LGB and currently T adults seeking to reform gender youth medicine. Okay, since you guys were all in DC, Jamie, I'm going to start with you actually, because you are you're somebody who's known for testifying at hearings and you're in the political mix pretty regularly. Can you explain what this case was about exactly and what was at stake?
Sure. So I think simplest understanding is that we have had close to 26 states in the United States implement some kind of regulation around pediatric gender transition interventions. So these are primarily puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgeries. One of those 26 states is only tackling surgeries. This case was about the state of Tennessee. They implemented one of these restrictions through a legislative process of a law, and through a series of challenges, it made its way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court was trying to make a decision. Does Tennessee have the right to restrict these kind of interventions in minors? And the challenge that the ACLU brought was a question of whether or not these patients are being discriminated against because of sex.
Okay. Now, you guys were like outside the what were you doing? Were you functioning as journalists? Do you want to actually, Lisa, why don't you go ahead? And by the way, thank you both for being here. Welcome. This is my delayed welcome. In my hurry to introduce you and get going, I forgot to say I'm glad you're here. Okay, so Lisa, maybe you can go ahead. Were you like on the steps of the Capitol making speeches, or were you in the corner with your notebook?
Yeah, I'm not an activist, despite what it says on the internet. So I had gotten a press pass, so I went inside. And so in the beginning, I was in the Supreme Court press room, which was fascinating. And I was there with some very famous purveyors of misinformation parading as truth, like Aaron Reed and Evan Urquhart and the woman who runs the SCOTUS blog, who said she has a transgender child and didn't want to hear about any of the objections being levied outside of the Supreme Court. So I went inside, and I will say about the case that this case was elevated by the United States DOJ, right? So they partnered. It started with the ACLU, Lambda Legal, and a white shoe law firm, and then this was brought by the US DOJ, and it's surmised that one of the reasons it was this case as opposed to those other bans that Jamie mentioned was that this had progressed the least. The least amount of evidence had been uncovered, and Chase Strangio, the ACLU lawyer, had actually said out loud, "Oh, the other cases have much better evidence, and so it needs to be this one because the other ones had unearthed the kind of scandal that we all know about." In terms of suppressing evidence reviews and not being honest about what we know and don't know about pediatric gender medicine.
Okay, and we should say the case is called U.S. versus Skretti. Skretti is the name of the Attorney General of Tennessee. Okay, but I don't know. I don't really understand this. Why is there a reason that the Supreme Court agreed to hear this particular case, or is it just that this is the one that they ended up bringing?
This is the one that they elevated, that they petitioned for, and the question at hand is whether denying those medications is a form of sex discrimination. And it's really kind of fascinating because you have, for instance, you have Ketanji Jackson Brown, who famously said she couldn't define what a woman is. And here they are arguing about what sex discrimination is. And so very early on, they say, if a boy wants puberty blockers or testosterone to match his own natal puberty, he can get them. But if a girl wants puberty blockers and testosterone for the puberty that she wants, she can't get them. And thus it's sex discrimination. And the transcript is a fascinating read because everyone's just going around in circles. Nobody seems to really know what they're talking about because you're equating a kind of a decision to simulate the puberty of the opposite sex with these kind of some kind of medical condition in which you're not going to go through your puberty or something's wrong with your endocrine system. And nobody even knows how to talk about that, as if we all get to choose which puberty we are, as if we all get to choose which sex we are, as if there are no sex differences. So you see over and over in the transcript this inability to grapple with no one even knows what we're talking about, the same way no one even knows what the purpose of these treatments are. Are they to eradicate gender dysphoria, or are they to affirm this, kind of spiritual trans identity? And I hope for some people listening or reading the transcript that they see how strange it all is and how unscientific. But when I listened to and read media coverage, mostly it said, "Oh, only the progressive judges really engaged heartily," which with the evidence. And I had the opposite experience where I thought only the conservative judges were really engaging with the substantive questions.
Yeah, I guess it depends on your information silos, because I was hearing that the conservative judges were really much more familiar with the issue, and citing cast review, sort of, if not chapter and verse, at least pretty specifically, Alito in particular. Jamie, what was your impression of that?
So I'll first kind of back up and clarify. I am not a journalist. I only was a journalist for one semester in my undergrad when I worked for the college newspaper. And I was told by that professor I would only be able to do this if I had a whole team of editors that was willing to read my work. So not a journalist. I was outside in the bitter, bitter cold, gave a speech and was part of the rally out front. We actually were not really engaged in what was going on inside until after that rally went down. I was much more engaged with the really blatant and quite surprising amount of homophobia that I was experiencing from the other rally participants on the other side of the issue outside.
Can you say more about that?
I have not seen that level of vitriol towards gay people in a very long time.
Let's
And
set it up about that. Explain how there were two
Right.
competing
So,
boards out front of the Supreme Court.
so out front of the Supreme Court police did set up a barricade. There were two groups. The rally on the side of Tennessee started much earlier, about 8 a.m. And it was actually predominantly gay men, lesbians, and feminists there holding signs out front. And then the other side showed up around 10 a.m. As far as I know, we weren't going over there to harass them, but we kept having people coming over to kind of get in our face and want to engage with us. At one point, a trans identified female, so a woman who I believe had transitioned to try to present as male, came over and was screaming in the face of a lesbian, "You're wearing boys' clothes, you are a dyke, you might as well have just transitioned. Why do you think you can wear boys' clothes outside? You need to just transition." This person was screaming that in this woman's face while the ACLU, in their yellow kind of, we're here to guard and make sure everybody gets their free speech, just stood there watching. I had a parent with a sign, the mom had said she had transitioned her son, now a daughter. I had started engaging with her and her spouse, and he was asking me some questions, and I just explained to him, I had intense gender dysphoria as a young person. I didn't understand why I wasn't a boy. I didn't understand why I was growing breasts. I didn't understand why I didn't have a penis as a kid. The dad was engaged. The mom I told dad and mom I grew up and I'm a lesbian and I'm, happy whole body lesbian. The mother told me that I was wrong, that I'm actually a male, that I have suppressed it so much, that my true gender identity I have just buried so much that I am masking it with my lesbianism. And a young detransitioner was standing next to me, and he just said, "That's the most blatantly homophobic thing I've ever heard in my entire life." And we walked away.
Did you get a sense that these people were like politically conservative, or were they so far left that they had internalized this stuff? I mean, I guess this is kind of a horseshoe theory example, right? You've got this kind of homophobia that used to come from the far right, and now it's on the far left.
I think it's the horseshoe. I think what we saw in part were just some very radical positions.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So in terms of the actual arguments and how equipped the justices were to take this on. So if I was just kind of following along on social media, I'm hearing clips with was it Sotomayor or Jackson talking about how taking an aspirin can which one was that? That
was Sotomayor.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So we're hearing stuff like that. And then, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm seeing sort of memes about how these are the lowest IQ people imaginable who are judges on the Supreme Court. It's a scandal that they're even within 100 yards of the building. I mean, obviously that's not true. There are ways of talking about legal precedents that I don't really understand. So what did you make of just kind of the quality of the arguments?
Well, I've never listened to a Supreme Court case before, so I don't have anything to compare it to. And it was clear that they had done different kinds of homework, or their clerks had done different kinds of homework, and that the progressive quote unquote judges had swallowed a lot of kind of activist talking points. And maybe someone could say the same thing about the conservative judges, except I really don't see a document like the Cass review as an activist document in any way, because it came out of talking to so many different stakeholders. And that's something that I've tried really hard to do myself, as much as people let me, just to talk to a lot of different kinds of people. And I still ended up kind of where the Cass review did. So I don't think of that as activism, but the progressive side didn't take that seriously. And the question is coming up about, for instance, Brown Jackson brought up Loving versus Virginia, which was interracial law. So they had argued it wasn't race discrimination. I guess it was the U.S. I actually don't, but anyway, I guess Virginia had argued that since both races are restricted, it's not race discrimination. And so Brown Jackson was comparing that, saying that Tennessee is saying, since neither boys nor girls can get this, that it's not sex discrimination. And so it's similar to that. And then other judges were bringing up the Bostock decision, which is the one that Neil Gorsuch, became the deciding vote on. And in that case, they also conflated homosexuality and gender identity, but they basically said it's sex discrimination if you can fire a man for wearing women's clothes, but not a woman, then it's sex discrimination.
Okay, Jamie, you wanted to jump in, I think.
I was just going to interject, Lisa, and just say, Gorsuch didn't ask any questions, though.
No, he didn't say anything.
And what I found interesting in that is that I don't know, analysis I've heard is that Tennessee basically said, we're not here to argue Bostock, that they were there to leave Bostock as a standing, and we're not going to go into it. So I wonder if Gorsuch was not interested in discussing it and not open up the rabbit hole of Bostock, but Bostock definitely, even in the number of good friend attorneys that I speak to, the opinion on Bostock is all over the place.
Well, can you explain a little bit more about Bostock, just because I think people are going to be wondering, what do we need to understand about that?
Well, one thing I was just going to say about it is that it's very revealing to me that some people would compare that to these very, very, very intense medications. That, again, nobody talked about what sex is. So if there's no difference between a man and a woman wearing women's clothes and a boy and a girl taking testosterone or estrogens or puberty blockers, then they don't know the difference between sex and gender norms. And that does seem to be at the heart of this battle of conflating sex and gender. None of us know what gender is. Ruth Bader Ginsburg used it as a synonym for sex, yes, famously because one of her assistants or people she was working with said, you can't say sex that much in front of, all these 9 men. So say gender sometimes, right?
Yeah.
That's where that came from.
And it really took off because it became very convenient for people who were sort of prudish or wanted to be able to talk about these issues in quote unquote polite company. You could just kind of slide in that word. And
but now
here we are.
People use it to mean everything, to mean bodily sex, to mean gender norms, to mean gender identity, whatever they think that is. And then you are agender. And I don't mean agender one word, but everyone has this thing called my gender, and it's everything and it's also nothing. And that's
did we lose you?
Part of why it's so difficult and why these arguments are so confusing. I felt like they were, again, I'd love to hear from people who regularly listen what they thought, but even back in the press room afterwards, there was one guy who said, oh, they're definitely going to come down on the side of the DOJ. It's going to be a sweep. And then everybody else said, no, it's going to be 6-3 along party lines.
Who was that? Who said that they thought that the DOJ won?
And I don't remember who it was. Someone who does this all the time. Someone who's in there all the time. And I couldn't tell. It couldn't tell.
Nina Totenberg, was it?
It wasn't, but she was there. She was. I did get to see her. I wasn't convinced. I mean, a couple of them, the men for sure. I wasn't sure about Amy Coney Barrett. And I wasn't convinced that they were all going to reject it out of hand, but the other question that comes up is if they ruled, yes, this is a form of sex discrimination, then essentially what they're saying, but not completely, is that transgender people are a protected class. And if they are a protected class, then that means that really none of the things that we're talking about, whether it's should people who identify as women who are not female be in female spaces, should they be in the prison, should they be in the locker room, on the sports teams, that means it's a categorical yes for everything that people who identify as women want, who are male. And so I don't know how much those judges who would be maybe personally opposed to that, how much they let that in, how much they weigh their decision based on the implications of the decision. I don't think they're supposed to do that. They're supposed to be just dealing with what's in front of them. But it's hard. It's hard not to think about what happens if they decide that that's a new protected class. And they've opted not to, in the recent past, they opted not to consider age a protected class, and something else that I can't remember now.
Disability. Disability is not a protected class, is my understanding, right?
Yeah, that's right.
But Chase was asked a question that would have led to this becoming a protected class. I mean, Chase was asked, is being trans unchangeable? And I think part of the question was in the concept of gender fluidity and these other identities that are now coming into play. Is this a permanent state? And under oath, Chase had to say, no, it's not. It's not it's changeable.
Well, what I recall, I haven't gotten to that part as I review the transcript, is that Chase said, gender fluidity does not mean that gender identity is immutable, because as long as your gender identity is different than your sex, then no matter how many times it changes, it's still fixed.
Oh my gosh. So the lack of it being fixed is what makes it fixed. Okay.
The transitioners were also brought up in that part of the questioning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ben, welcome.
Sorry.
Ben.
I'm late.
That's okay. No, it's always good to come to the party. It's always good to come a little late to the party while it's in full swing. So yeah, well, I already introduced you, so everyone knows who you are. So we're just gonna have you jump in here. We were talking about this idea of a protected class, if a transgender identity, in fact, I guess it was at issue whether or not it's a protected class and what the arguments would be. So maybe you want to think about that a little bit. But before you do that, can you just tell us briefly, you were in DC also, were you outside in the cold? Were you inside somewhere? Just tell us really briefly about your experience.
Yeah, I was there with Lisa and Jamie and a bunch of other people. We were out in the cold. Can you hear me okay? Lisa was inside, but we were all there together in the morning. And Jamie and I were both slated to speak. Jamie went on around maybe 11:30 or so. I was early. I spoke around 8:40. And they asked us to speak for 3 minutes. And so that's what I did. I put something together. And it was just one person after the other. I think speeches started at 8 a.m. and then they went until noon. And so we were out there, I think, at 7. And it was early and it was cold, but it was great. The press was there. I wrote about this on my Substack, but when I got there, I'm like, what am I doing? Is this, and then I get there and there's like all gays and lesbians with signs that say, gender-affirming care is the new conversion therapy and stop trans and gay kids. We were just overwhelmingly present, which was great, especially at the beginning. And so that was like, oh, I'm where I'm supposed to be. So it was a good day and it was a successful day, I think.
And under whose auspices were you there? Was it the LGBT Courage Coalition?
Correct. Yeah, it was a team. We had paired up with, we were there representing our organization, and then Do No Harm, the organization were the people that had put on and arranged for the stage to be there, the podium, the microphone, and then the list of speakers from different organizations. But it was a coalition, a very diverse, politically diverse coalition of people.
Yeah. When I was preparing for this conversation, I just looked up a little bit about the Skretti case, and I just want to read you from Wikipedia. This probably won't surprise you, but I would like our listeners to hear this. So, it says it's a pending U.S. Supreme Court case, et cetera. We've been discussing. Okay, background of this case. This is Wikipedia. As a result of the culture war in the United States since the mid 2010s, transgender rights in the United States have come under attack from conservative groups, including the Republican Party and evangelicals. Okay, this is Wikipedia, so I'm sure we shouldn't be surprised. But did you feel like with the crowd, how represented was your side, and how much of your side was this broader coalition as opposed to like the old moral majority types?
Is that question for me?
Any of you, actually? Yeah, go ahead, Ben, and then Jamie, you can jump in.
I mean, it was about split, I would say. It was really interesting because I don't really remember listening to who spoke immediately after me, but someone remarked that, well, you got up there, you said what you had to say, let's make more space for gender nonconformity. We're medicalizing gender nonconformity instead of making more space for it. A lot of young gay people are being harmed. This is not evidence-based. And, just this kind of like, I don't know, pro-liberal, kind of pro-gay appeal. And then right afterwards, it was someone that came up, I don't remember who, but gave like pretty much like a polar opposite approach. It was like this, it was a very big contrast throughout the day. There was me, and there's Jamie, and then there's, feminists, and then there's Matt Walsh. And then there's, Republican senators, Marjorie Taylor Greene. So it was diverse, but I would say about 50-50 split. What do you guys think?
I think you're right. I think both speakers and the public, I mean, speaker wise, it was really, I think there was maybe 6 or 7 out gays and lesbians. There were a number of detransitioners, and then there were a number of, more mainstream Republican viewpoints held. But I really feel like those of us out there holding the signs, didn't you feel like it was just a big gay party?
I did. I really did. I mean, we were right there in the front and center. You guys maybe have already mentioned this, but, and it's not just, stop transing gay kids and, this and that, but also a huge banner that says like Democrats against, puberty blockers or whatever it had said, and then stop medicalizing gender nonconformity or gender nonconforming young kids. So we were right there front and center. So it was, we were really pleased that the New York Times on their front page for a long time had a picture of that sign, of me holding that sign and everything. So we were very visible, but also at the same time, it's like they couldn't avoid it, because, and we were in the Guardian as well, because we were so present and so front and center there. Now, is it, did they write about, our side at all? And it's pathetic. It's lazy and it's pathetic because you could simply not ignore the consistent messaging and signs and overwhelming, crowd of people that were there with this specific message.
And yet they did.
And they did.
In the end, they did. They did ignore it. And
okay,
I was going around saying, like, this is a historic day because America's going to realize that the people concerned about this are not right-wing people. I mean, yes, them too, but that this is not a left-right issue. I've done almost nothing else for the last 4 years but try to make this point, and finally it's here. I just was like, I mean, I was actually kind of discombobulated because I thought, oh, if this has happened, what is my mission now? Because what am I doing? But I went around, I already told this story to Jamie and Ben, but in the press room, I went around saying to everybody, did you notice that at the pro-ban rally, there are all these lesbians, gays, bisexuals, feminists, and liberals? And isn't that an interesting story? Because, I mean, if you're a journalist, it used to be that you'd be looking for the most interesting angle, not that you're just repeating the same stuff.
Yeah, that's how you got a Pulitzer.
Right.
Back in the day.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes, because nobody said, wow, that sign says stop transing gay kids.
Right. Like,
To the
wow,
single
what
third
are
one?
you talking about?
So what were they saying in the press room, Lisa, though? Like, who were you talking to? New York
I was,
Times reporters and Washington Post reporters, and also like Substackers and, you know,
I was
those
talking
types?
to, in particular, someone from The Economist, someone from Vanity Fair, and someone from the SCOTUS blog. And they dismissed it all as anti-trans. And honestly, I felt like I'd been shot.
Oh,
From The Economist, even though The Economist just ran a very lengthy and comprehensive and just, you know, sober story from Jesse Singal, that was pretty accurate and not,
Yeah.
you know, very much down the middle. But so these are just kind of like different. So I don't think we can say
I
The
mean, these are the
Economist. This is not The Economist position, but this happened to be the reporter that they sent.
yeah, I guess it's who covers. Maybe they covered the Supreme Court stuff,
Right.
and the woman from One Woman said, "I can't even hear about that rally. I have a trans kid." And my immediate response was, "How can you possibly cover this subject then?" And she just kind of trotted off, and then there was an amazing moment where this the woman kind of in charge of corralling all of the reporters got up, kind of middle-aged black woman, very lovely, got up, she stood on a chair to give us all directions, and she said, once you go in there, you can't come out, so you got to go to the bathroom now. The men's bathroom is right next to us, and then the women's bathroom is down the hall. Of course, the women's bathroom is farther away, as always, and she explains where it was. Now, that's it. There's a men's bathroom and a women's bathroom. So then this woman, very gender normative looking woman, raises her hand and says, well, where should the non-binary people go to the bathroom? Now, first of all, there's only two. The bathrooms are binary. There's two of them, right? So the answer has got to be just go to the bathroom where you want to go.
I'd say whichever that has the shortest line.
Yeah, go to the men's bathroom. It's right there. But the woman was just like, no, you have to go now. Like she had no idea what they were even saying. And I could see that for most of the people, they were very mad about not having the injustice, and I'm using that word, because we're talking about the Supreme Court, of no special accommodations for them. Whereas I was cracking up because to me it was like, this is like a person with a job,
she's like, just go to the bathroom and hurry up.
Time for the astronaut diapers. That's what I say.
It's just the elites versus the regular people, and the
So-
regular people were like, you gotta piss, do it now, because
Yeah,
you're not going to be able to go.
Jimmy Breslin is rolling over in his grave. Okay, so did you feel that the press pool was an activist press pool? I mean, was that was the feeling, or was it kind of even? Like, what was the vibe? Did you feel like you were at a university, protest event?
Well, there were people from conservative outlets there too, who were very quiet. And then there was Aaron Reed, right, and Evan Urquhart, and these people who have, spend all of their time kind of twisting evidence and truth the same way Chase Strangio and the liberal judges were. But yes, there was a smarminess to them, a smugness that came out when I tried to say, isn't it interesting that the story unfolding outside this building is so much more complex than the way we normally see it? And their utter lack of curiosity about that and just immediate dismissal of it. It's been a total of 7 years of me working on this, and very actively for the last 4. And I don't know why it shocks me every time, because I'm not an optimist, and I don't know why I keep thinking that people will wake up, or that it's just boring. It's just boring to not have to tell this. Oh, somebody's
Yeah, I don't know what's beeping, but go ahead.
Ben, you're beeping. Turn your notification. No, anyway, it's a much less interesting story. Your own smugness and smearing your smugness all over your writing and all over the media. I don't want to consume that. I find it insulting and boring. But that's what I felt like I encountered. And I was seated. I don't know who was on the right of me, but then one that next to the person on the right of me was Aaron Reed, and next to Aaron Reed was Masha Gessen. But immediately to the left of me was
Gessen.
Yes.
Yeah, you're dead naming.
Oh, excuse me, M Gessen. To the left of me was a young conservative reporter who was, of course, easier to talk to. And that's
we should say, so M. Gessen, who came up in a recent conversation I had with Ben Ryan, is of course the journalist who was formerly at the New Yorker and is a Russian emigre themselves. This is a biological female who was non-binary, they them, and I think maybe transitioning. I'm not really sure. Is medically transitioning, but I'm not sure the pronoun situation. In any case, is a Russian scholar. I mean, not a scholar, a Russian expert, and that very much reporting on global affairs and this sort of thing. And because of Masha's own gender identity, has sort of been funneled into reporting on this issue now for the New York Times, and is very visibly transitioning. I mean, this has been the sort of prominent public intellectual, I guess, for lack of a better word, for a long time. And now the byline is initial M Gessen. I'm assuming you did not interact with them, but did you get a sense of like how they were reacting or feeling about things? Were they outspoken? Like, could you read their facial expressions?
Well, so in the press room, I did chit chat with Evan and Aaron, especially in the beginning. Before I can't tell because I'm not very prominent, but I think they figured out that I was on their shit list at some point and stopped talking. But at first,
they should have an app for that. They should have been like able to sort of sense who was there.
It's transgender map.
Well, they also have this this thing called Shimaguri eyes. You guys know about that? It's a filter, a chrome filter, and it will mark as red or green whatever or whoever is pro or anti-trans. So if once you put it on your computer, I think it's a Chrome extension, maybe on any browser, everything is marked as red or green. That's known.
And so when they come out with the Google glasses, then they're weather glasses, and then when they look at people, they'll light up red or they'll light up green to know
Could be.
Yeah, that you'll be able to walk around anywhere. This could be good for all of us. Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to derail you. Okay. All right, but M. Gessen, for instance.
So M. Gessen, I was standing right next to me and did not chit-chat much with anyone. Aaron talked a lot about, Aaron will be getting married this Saturday in Missouri. To Zoe, and there was a discussion about how I was sitting directly in the press room before we went to the court next to Joe Yerkuba, who's a reporter on how to write things in a biased manner for NBC Out. And Aaron was saying, I'm so sorry we didn't invite you to our wedding, and we were just talking about how we should add you to the guest list.
They should have had the wedding there. They should have had it at this event.
That would have been great.
That you would have made the vows column in the Times for sure.
All that and interjecting myself into that conversation occasionally as a friendly person, which I am, and a busybody. Gessen didn't say anything, but then
Lisa, I need to add a piece of trivia for the next time you meet M, though. Okay. So M has a child, and their name in Russian translates to Christmas tree in English. So just so you're aware, if that ever comes up and you need something to talk to M about, you can talk about naming children.
I bet it's a nice word.
Yeah.
Aaron Reed apparently has a child too, because they kept referring to.
Aaron does have a child too.
Kiddo.
M has a couple of children, only one of which M bore and gave birth to pre-transition.
And then name them Christmas tree.
Yeah.
But then all of the way we're talking and the way we're struggling to talk about these people is such a great example of what's wrong with this, that we get so tripped up in language that we don't arrive at the substance. And I think about that when I'm in my liberal bubble of chit-chatting with ladies, where I'm just about to get fully kicked out of all these ladies groups. But when they say the unhoused instead of homeless people, because it comes up a lot, because there are a lot of homeless people.
I think it's experiencing houselessness now.
And I think, I just keep saying, does that change the material reality of their lack of shelter? Like, if we are worrying about what we are calling them, are we focusing on what caused them to be without any shelter? And I feel that way similarly about, we don't, is everybody using sex-based pronouns now? Is it verboten for me to respect somebody's pronouns? Do I have to use, if they keep changing their names, do I have to do that? And so it keeps us from focusing on these important issues. And in a way, all of the arguing and debating that went on over whether this was sex discrimination was really taking away from, should we be doing this?
Well, but Lisa, that's really interesting, though. I have never thought about it like that. So you're saying the unhoused, the homeless, and really the point of this is, does that change that this person does not have shelter? If you take that same concept and go over to apply it to trans, what is that core? Is that core? Because this is what the ACLU, every time I've interacted them in court, cannot get to. Is the core that this is a mental health condition that needs to be treated, and that we need to go along with this because someone is mentally ill?
Well, okay. Apropos of this, perhaps, I want to ask you guys about Chase Strangio. So Chase Strangio is the head of, the head counsel at the ACLU for anything having to do with LGBT issues. Not the head of the ACLU, which I think some people think, because he's probably the best known person associated with the ACLU currently. So we see him making the media rounds a lot as an activist. He's always the one that gets quoted in the stories, but I don't think a lot of people were familiar with his lawyering skills. This is a transgender man, meaning biological female. And so I'm curious, for those of you who, sort of saw him in action, what did you think about his legal chops, I guess? Anyone?
Well, he's good. He's good on his feet. Pretty good on his feet. I mean, he was forced to admit that suicide is very rare, which was an incredible moment. And I think a really an important moment, that everyone can now say that in the Supreme Court, the ACLU had to admit that actual completed suicide is extremely rare, which I hope is something that parents will hear. And it doesn't, Chase immediately came back with, well, suicidal ideation is bad, suicide attempts are bad, and yes, they are, but it's very rare for someone to actually commit suicide due to gender dysphoria. Not that you can ever know exactly why someone has committed suicide. But he or she, I don't even know anymore, was good on his feet. I was surprised, even though I had sat down with him in person a few years ago, I was surprised at how high his voice is. And actually, when I came in the building, he was the first person I saw. And I said, Chase, it's Lisa Davis. Do you remember we met a few years ago and had coffee? And he said, I remember.
What did you have coffee with him about? Was this like research for your book? How did you get that meeting?
after I wrote my New York Times piece in 2017 about how people kept assuming my masculine daughter was trans, he wrote a piece that went very viral and that up to 4,000 people sent me, arguing against my points. And I remember reading it and thinking, I don't really understand this. It's kind of some verbal diarrhea. It's just going for anything, which I think is his style, right? Just go for anything. Just throw every argument out there and see the spaghetti on the wall.
If you get a chance to
thing.
read Chase's response, see how many times Chase says white supremacist in it. I think it's, I read it, I've counted, and so it's more than once. So yeah, it's verbal diarrhea, and
in a piece about gender. And we should say your piece, Lisa, was in the New York Times. Was Chase's piece also in the New York Times?
No, it was just on Medium, and then it got picked up somewhere. And, this was my awakening, because I did not know that there was that people would react with such vitriol. I did not know that anything I'd said in my piece, which included I support trans kids, I assumed that there were trans kids, and by that I meant, like, I assumed that that this was a discrete category and that you could tell. But I just thought, well, I don't think that's what's going on with my kid. And so I just find the situation really odd that there's so little room for a masculine girl or a feminine boy, and why is this the same as that? But I didn't know very much about, how to categorize a trans kid, which now is anybody who says they're trans. So yeah, I reached out to Chase Strangio in 2017 and said, you think I'm wrong. I'm open to learning more. Let's get together. And then I tried to pitch a story about that, about, hey, these people, said all kinds of crazy things about me, and I reached out to them. And I also reached out to Kate Bornstein, and I went up to Kate Bornstein's house.
Explain who that is.
Kate Bornstein, who's a kind of also a trans woman, writer,
Gender Outlaw,
activist,
the book.
Somewhat on the has been somewhat reasonable. And these people all sat down with me and talked to me. But sometime in the last year, Chase wrote to me and said, I regret ever sitting down with you.
Okay. But took the time to write to you and tell you that?
Hey.
Well, I didn't know that.
Yeah, because
Lisa, can you tell us what Chase said during that coffee date, when you had said what Chase's response was when you had said, I'm looking to really tackle the nuance of this issue. I think that's really important. What did Chase say?
Well, 7, almost 8 years ago, but
you told me that Chase said we can't afford nuance.
Oh yeah, oh God, that was the biggest thing. And what an asshole I am for ever letting that affect me. I mean, here I am with Queen of Nuance, Meghan Daum, or Daum. We don't know anymore what her name is.
No, yeah, exactly. All German names are a little nuanced.
Yeah, we can't afford nuance because the right wing will co-opt. It will.
Yeah, which is true. True. I mean, it is true that any nuance that was true. In fact, when I wrote that nuanced piece, I got a call from the Laura Ingraham people inviting me on, and I just thought, what's happening? Why is this? Why do they think that I'm supporting them?
Well, perhaps let me push that back against that, though. Like, why are we assuming that everybody on the right misunderstands the concept of, hey, these are gender nonconforming kids and we shouldn't be chemically castrating them? I mean, maybe there was an argument there that Laura understood in your,
Well, that's irrelevant. It was co-opted by the right. The right wing claimed me and claimed my piece, and that's what Chase said would happen, and that was true. It doesn't mean that they're not right. I mean, the way that I'm very, very practiced in alienating people. I'm very, very good at it. And one of my all-time best ways of doing it is when I start to talk to my people, Brooklyn liberals, I say, oh, the Republicans are right about the science. And they just recoil in horror.
You say the right did co-opt it, and you say that, but I feel I see Chase, ACLU, and all of those people as, if not more, responsible, because Chase is saying we can't afford nuance, we shut it down. So of course the right is going to react in a maybe unnuanced way. They're going to be like, oh, they just threw us.
But that's what they
just
want.
threw us this.
But that's what Chase wants.
Exactly. They just threw us this entire thing. How yeah, we're going to run with this, you know? And so it's Chase's fault. It's the left's fault. It's those 4,000 people that sent you that piece in Medium saying you are not allowed to say this. And then it became where your voice and whatever, it's not acceptable to say. And the only people that are really loud about it are the right. Right?
Yeah. Here's what I think Chase meant. If you can say it's right wing and it's just based on this kind of outdated, corrosive moral objection, then you can fight against it. But if you give them more ammunition than just this kind of Christian narrow frame, then they might win. And nuance, right, is gives them new ways of combating it, and that's what Chase didn't want.
Oh yeah.
And eventually, I feel like I just learned this just Thursday night when I tried to talk to a New York City mayoral candidate. I finally was like, they are never going to learn, and I'm going to have to bring my nuance over to the right. And that is what I'm doing now, is I am going to try to talk to and work with Republicans, because they're in charge now, to understand the concerns of gays and lesbians about the young kids, obviously not the teen kids who are their own issue, but the young kids who would most likely grow up to be gay if not socially transitioned, because the nuance, they are still anti-nuance. The Democrats are still anti-nuance.
Yeah, I mean, I want to ask you guys how you're feeling about Nancy Mace, because talk about a lack of nuance. I mean, that whole situation with Sarah McBride and Nancy Mace and the bathroom at the Capitol, it just seems like it's a power grab on both sides. But I find it really exasperating. I mean, do you have thoughts, Jamie? This might be a little bit more in your wheelhouse.
I met with her. I'll say this, and it actually kind of follows, Lisa, with what you were just saying, that, I feel like you kind of had I'm giving up on the left moment, and I'm going to try to see if we can work with the right. I have met with so many elected officials that are Republicans, and what I found refreshing about Nancy Mace was that oftentimes I will have to bring up the gay and the lesbian topic with other Republican candidates. She was just right off the gate like, oh, I'm all for gay and lesbian rights. This has nothing to do with it. She just understood, and she basically launched right into, these are two completely different requests of the world. The requests from gays and lesbians are nothing like the requests that she is feeling like she's fighting against in the worldview of the bathrooms. She's a little bit of a spitfire. Yeah.
Okay.
But she immediately, I feel like what Lisa's saying, that part of the conversation is, hey, Republicans, if you're going to try to tackle the nightmare that is what has happened in pediatric gender medicine, can you maybe help us set up so that there isn't a leading backlash into things like marriage or other sort of basic fundamental rights?
Interesting. All right. We don't have that much time left, but what are we missing here? What do you want to make sure people understand about this past week and its implications for this issue moving forward?
My biggest takeaway, being in DC for a week, meeting with officials, being in the steps of the Supreme Court, Skretti, Trump's win does not mean that there is a clear policy or a way forward on any of these issues around trans and gender medicine, it seems like they are going to be figuring this out as they go, and there's not a really good trajectory, and that we are still going to be in the trenches for at least the next 2 years.
So like a state by state
Ben?
issue. Well, yeah, I think that it's more personal, I guess. I mean, I have, so my patience is worn thin, and but not in a horrible way. Like not in like a, I think it's just it's embarrassing now. It's embarrassing. It's, Lisa says, earlier, when they say go to the bathroom and this gender conforming woman said, oh, where do non-binary people go? It's embarrassing that conversation is taking place in the Supreme Court before a case about healthcare for young people. That's insulting. It's insulting to hear these justices, appointed by presidents, talking about, Elena Kagan. It sounds like you are against gender nonconformity. You really want to enforce gender norms and gender conformity by not medicalizing gender nonconformity. I mean, and this Tennessee lawyer, I mean, it's the most backwards and disappointing argument that people can't see this. But, look, I'm out there outside, and a reporter from the AP is asking me these questions. What's your name for pictures? How do you spell this? And can I ask why you're here? And I'm just saying we need to make more space for gender nonconformity. Are we requiring young kids to change everything about themselves in order to properly fit into society? Oh, I'd never thought about it like that. That's so interesting. And I'm like, okay, that's great. I'm glad that this message is getting out here, but it's just it's a failure on the part of media. And I look at this and I think, okay, media they're having these battles within the newsrooms between crazies and normal people and sane people, but then they're also responding to, it's not entirely their fault, because they're responding to their audiences that demand that they print only things that they agree with and that is their viewpoint. They're following what the audience wants as well. So this is an endemic, it's endemic to the entire country. It's media's fault, but it's a failure. It's a huge failure.
I think it's getting worse though.
Yeah.
I was on I made a Blue Sky profile just to see how this would work. I was banned within 4 hours. One of the first things though is that I knew that Ben, Ryan, and Jesse Singal were on Blue Sky. I went and found them. Every single post that Jesse Singal had put on there was labeled intolerant, including an article from The Economist. Right. The article printed in The Economist was labeled intolerant. And I was just like, if that's what's happening, if now we're going to even see these social media groups like go into these silos even worse.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. And I don't like what I'm seeing on Twitter now, which is a lot of people just are, they're free to say anything. They're not measuring their words. They know that all the people who would go after them are gone.
Megan, so I was not spoken to in such a way ever on Twitter that I was within 2 hours on Blue Sky.
Yeah, I've made the decision not to go into Blue Sky because I really think it would be bad for my health. Like I just really, I don't. I typed in the names of some some mutuals, as they say, and the stuff that was being said about them was really upsetting. And I just said, this is not good for my cardiovascular health. Yeah. Lisa, can't remember the original question, but what do you want to make sure we take away from this?
Piggybacking on what Jamie said, I think that moving to your own echo chamber completely is scary and a bad idea. But I also think if you don't get it now, if you are a liberal or a Democrat and you are still dismissing the backlash against this and against DEI and against the COVID lockdowns, if you are still framing it as bigotry, I think it's hopeless. And this was part of my, like, I have to stop doing this now. You are not reachable. And for me personally, like, it's very frightening because I feel that I'm done with something that all of my friends and family are still part of.
Yeah.
And I don't know what it means for me
You're unburdened,
personally,
Lisa.
but I do know that I need to go where there's a feeling of possibility. And so far, I have been treated much better and by that I mean people have been willing to listen to me who I never ever thought, right-wing people who I never thought would ever listen to a word I said, have been, whether they agree or not, to consider what I have to say in good faith. And that has very rarely happened among my own people. So hopefully everybody will resign from the Democrats. I think we need a mass resignation. And
Do
yeah,
you think it's a fair statement to say that homophobia on the political right is dying out?
that's strong.
Yes. Well, I've had many of these conversations. And what I do find really interesting is that most of the far right, when I talk to them about that homophobia, I think that they see now that there's a pathway that we can respect each other. But I think where it went wrong is there were over asks. So most people will bring up the cake baker to me.
Mhm.
They will say things like, why did you have to have the word marriage? Could civil unions, civil union was fine. All of the same legal rights. Did you need to take the word marriage? And then, but even more common than that is that damn Baker case. That is where so many people are like, and then people say to me, why would you want someone to bake a cake for you that didn't want to bake a cake for you?
Did you want to get famous?
Yeah.
But I think that they see that, like, where their rights come up, they just wanted a little bit of respect that maybe, does it have to be, I don't know. I do think that there's a lot more acceptance now that they see how far badly it has gone. They're like, can we just go back to what
Right.
the kids wanted in 90s? We'll accept that. We're fine.
Kind of like when people start feeling nostalgic about George W. Bush or something like that. Yeah. Exactly. which is a false nostalgia. Ben, any thoughts on that?
Well, I just think too, like, oh gosh, no, I lost my train of thought. I'm caught up on looking at what can be and unburdened by what has been.
Well, I actually have, okay, but you know what, while you're thinking, and we do need to wrap up, but I want to just as concisely as possible, and if we can come anywhere close to nailing this down, I think this will be worth the price of admission for listeners. We're in the holidays. We're going to be with family. We're going to be in situations with people who aren't necessarily following this stuff. What is the most effective way to explain to our progressive friends who are still confusing this issue with gay rights? What is the most effective way to show them that this is not the same thing and that there's really a better way of thinking about this? Like, without, waving your hands around and going crazy and doing what I do, which is get my voice all pitched up high and get all flustered. What's the easiest way to just articulate this? Any one of you can go first.
I find that what really helped me personally were the data and really having data that showed the relationship between childhood gender nonconformity and later homosexuality. That never moves anybody. So what even though that that's what I liked, but in the end I say, do you really think that the message for my kid should be that something's wrong with her body? Do you think that a kid like mine should be told she's not really a girl because she's so male typical? Think about that message. That's the only time I can ever move anybody.
Interesting. Ben?
Yeah, actually, I was going to say the same thing, making more space for, I think people were so shocked when I said that, when journalists are coming up to me from Hearst Communications, from the AP, from Washington Blade, and they're hearing me and they're saying, why are you here? And I'm like, because more space needs to be made for gender nonconformity, and that's their brains are like, because here is, meanwhile, inside, Elena Kagan is saying, you guys are saying that you don't want gender nonconforming. They are on this, because GNC, transgender nonconforming, non-binary, they've put it under this umbrella where it's all trans. And, so that I think is something, but I think too, in terms of separating it from, gay, they came for kid. This is a kid's. People say on the quote unquote reasonable, trans people TM who say online, I don't know how we can just have normal lives and just be respected and that's easy. That's very easy. You started coming for children and medicalizing and saying there's trans kids and then blocking their puberty. And you know what I mean? That's easy. With gay folks, we were concerned about the right to serve in the military, the right to, not be fired for being gay, and the right to marry. These are adult issues. Even with kids, it's leave them alone. That's our message. Don't say, oh, you're gay, you're gay, you're gay. If a kid says to me, hey, I'm gay, I'm going to be like, that's nice, but you might change your mind. You're young, just grow up and be a kid, whatever, What I'm talking about when we say trans kids gay kids, adult trans gay kids, it's just it's a shorthand for, look, that kid, we all know what we're talking about. That kid will likely grow up to be a lesbian. That kid will likely grow up to be gay, but they're not sexually mature, and homosexuality has to do with, adolescence and coming into your being as a mature adult human being. So, that's what we're talking about, but just leave the kids alone.
Okay, but what if they say, well, this isn't really happening. The surgeries are not happening. The cross-sex hormones are not really happening. Jamie, I'll give you the last word since this is your thing.
I think we're well beyond that at this point. At this point, I think Lisa probably actually nailed it. If you have been unwilling to look at the data, if you have been unwilling to look at the evidence at this point, you're kind of in the monster category now. I don't think we can lay this out in any other way. It's just time to move on with those who have been willing to look at this. And I do, though, in terms of hope, I see that we have numbers. I think that we actually have the numbers. The media has kept this quiet because we have the numbers, that we outnumber them.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Jamie Reed, Lisa Davis, and Ben Appel, thank you so much for doing this at the last minute. This has been a phenomenal conversation, as I knew it would be. And thank you for all that you do.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Megan.
Megan.
Thanks, Megan.